some time ago when I was asked to help lead a little workshop on the topic of renunciation in everyday life. I listened to a talk that Swami Kriyananda gave. I don't remember what the topic was, but it must have been relevant to that. But he had the most exquisite insight, which is not surprising. He related a story that happens in the autobiography of a yogi. Anybody who's read it will remember this story, but Paramhansa Yogananda, when he was still a young man, a teenager, he had met his guru already, but he was convinced that he needed to go up into the mountains in the Himalayas to have an experience of samadhi. He told his teacher, I want to have an extended experience of bliss. And of course, the adorableness of that story is that he was with an avatar and he could have stayed right where he was and had that experience. But he was young and he was determined. And I think also so that we could all read the story and I could be up here talking to you about it. He left. He didn't hear the subtle hint in the voice of his teacher that was sort of saying, you don't really have to go up into the mountains. But he went, so he took a train to a certain town and he got off and he was in a temple there. And it was a very unusual temple. In the temple, there's nothing but a perfectly round stone, really in some way representing that for our true spiritual self, there's no beginning and there's no end, and everything just goes on to endlessness. That's what we're looking for. And he was clearly in a stubborn frame of mind, again, helping us to see what happens to us when we ourselves get there. Everybody was bowing and pronaming to this stone, and he refused to. He said, I'm not going to bow to any stone. And he didn't. And he left the temple. And he went out, and in a series of events, he asked for directions to find this great saint that he was looking for, Ram Gopal Mizumdar. And he kept getting misdirected. The first person he asked thought about it for a long time, and he even said to him, when you get to the intersection, turn right, and you'll have to go a long way. So, of course, Master just walked and walked. Finally, he came upon another man. It was dark. He said he was fumbling around in the dark. The man said, oh, no, when you were back at that intersection hours ago, you actually really should have gone left. Anyway, the man was kind enough to put him up for the night. He was, again, the next morning, given poor directions. And then as he's walking still along the path, this very small, he said, and unpretentious man steps out onto the path. And of course, this was the saint he was looking for, but he didn't know that in the moment. And so Ram Gopal says to him, I ask you, young sir, why did you choose to not bow to that stone? And Master was just taken. Here he was, hours away from that temple. How did this man know? And then, without waiting for an answer, he said to him, let me ask you. He said, where do you think God is? And Master said, well, God's everywhere. And Ram Gopal said to him, yes, next time, best if you bow in front of the stone, because God is everywhere and in everyone. When Swami Kriyananda was relating that story in the talk, he said that was the instant in which Paramhansa Yogananda's purpose in coming to the West was revealed. In that very instant where he had to focus on that knowing God is everywhere in everyone, and that he would come here and really, as part of this new dispensation of really sharing about spirituality in a very different way than the whole Judeo-Christian ideology, that he would come here and present this to us. Now, I'd read that story many times, as many of you had, but it never dawned on me. I was so taken with Swamiji in that moment that he understood what an important crossroad that was. And subsequent to that, through Yogananda, through Swami Kriyananda, we've just been hearing that now for decades and learning it and really trying to come to that realization ourselves. This is just what this reading says. God is everywhere and in everyone. And whatever thoughts we hold about anybody, whatever judgments we hold, however we treat people, if we do that to anyone, we're doing it to ourselves. We will suffer with it or reap the benefits, and we're doing it to God himself, because that which is so hard for our human mind to grasp, there is no separation. We are all part of the same whole. And our job in this life, if you will, is to live with that intention of living in that consciousness of infinity. That is why we are here right now. I don't want to say too much about Patanjali this morning, but in this moment it just begs to remind all of us what the first three sutras were. They're Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, as I imagine many of you know. But for those of you who don't, Patanjali was a great sage who's often called the father of yoga, because he came and he wrote teachings that had nothing to do with any particular religion, but teachings from his own realized knowledge that said, if in fact you want to know and experience the divine within yourself, these are the steps that you will have to follow. Doesn't matter what religion you are. If you're a spiritual seeker, this is how you will go. And the first sutra says, and now we come to the study of the science of yoga. And again, without going deeply into it, the now implies we've been somewhere else, and we realize in this moment whatever else we were trying, however hard we've been working to find happiness, peace, joy, wisdom, that sense of real rightness, it hasn't worked. So here we are about to study the science of yoga, which is the how-to on the spiritual path. How do we find our way where all of our hearts want us to go, even if we're not conscious of that yet? And the second sutra says, yoga is the neutralization of the whirlpool of feelings. And that is really the how. That's exactly what goes on inside of each of us, is that we are trying to neutralize all of our feelings, our likes, our dislikes, our desires, those things that make us angry, those things that make us happy, coming to a more central, neutral place. The second Yoga Sutra. And the third says, is realizing this essence of spirituality, coming to these spiritual truths. The yogi rests within himself. So in those three sutras, Patanjali says, here's what you need to do. You need to start studying yoga. You need to neutralize, calm down your feelings, and then you'll be able to rest in yourself. Just an exquisite short version of what it means to live in the consciousness of infinity. So what we need to do to be able to come to understand this reading is we need to wake up to that reality. We need to say to ourselves, we are not limited to this body. We're not limited to the thoughts that go on in our mind. We do not need to be so reactive in the world. We don't need to do any of that. That is not really who we are. We are so much more than that. But how do we do that? It's not easy, which many of us know. It's all about our consciousness. It's all about changing our consciousness. I had several stories in my own life that came to me when after that thought came about changing our consciousness. And then I thought to myself, wow, relating stories in my life these days is like reading some ancient history to some of you. And I don't even know if people can relate to some of these stories. But one of them you can all relate to. The very first day I went into a clinical practice in medical school. It was within the first month or two of medical school. But I had begged to be put on a clinical rotation because I had been a nurse for 14 years and I was feeling such sadness about being stuck in a classroom again. So I went to the dean. I did everything I could do. I said, let me have a half a day a week where I come in and be around patient care. So they put me on an emergency room assignment. And I was, as I say, not even a month into medical school, and I'm in the emergency room, and case after case after case, I'm saying to myself, these doctors are horrible. My God, they're so rude to patients. And what I was seeing was, doctors would walk in, not even introduce themselves in the emergency room, just lift up somebody's gown, start feeling their belly, listening to their heart, never tell anybody their name. I mean, it was sort of reasonable, that's the problem, reasonable that I was having that negative reaction. But then the thought comes into my head, Shanti, just like this, where is the healing in that kind of thinking? If you walk around with these thoughts, this is first day. Is any healing going to be able to flow through you? That was a gift that said you change your consciousness if you expect any healing to happen, right? I mean, it was just wake up. I didn't have these words for it, but how are you going to change your consciousness? I remember, because I grew up in the 60s, and I've said before, it was a very good time, actually, when I think back on it. It was really about make love, not war. That was the slogan in those days, for those of you who weren't around. People put flowers in their hair, and they wore less clothes to be more free. And I mean, it was a little odd, thinking back on it, but it was lovely. It was really about trying to love everybody. We were in the midst of the war in Vietnam, and we would be out there. I'm just blocking on the name of the big concert and gathering in upstate New York. Woodstock, thank you. I mean, it was beautiful up there. No harm was done. There was nobody acting out. People weren't getting hurt. No violence. Everybody just truly, consciously focusing on loving each other. I mean, that's really the truth of what it was. It was a shift in consciousness, in a way, all that could happen at the time. The music, the people who were writing all of the folk music about really talking about why war was wrong. It was an incredible time, in a way where people were taking their intentions, their positive intentions, which is what I had to do in that story with the emergency room, and making sure that our deeds followed our higher intentions of goodness, of love, of compassion, of healing. This is exactly what Swami Kriyananda did when he started Ananda Village. It's a perfect example for us all the way through. Swamiji knew that he had to develop a community based on spiritual principles where every intention and every deed was on our way to self-realization. And he never compromised. He helped people develop businesses. He helped people develop schools. He developed retreats, communities. But at no point did he get lost and think that efficiency was more important than how we treat each other or giving people an opportunity to grow spiritually. At no point did he feel that making more money was more important than living our lives by dharma, by right action. At every point, Swami kept, and it's not because he was against efficiency or against making money. He made enormous amounts of money to start all these communities. It's because he needed to make sure that our intentions and our deeds, right? This reading is intentions versus deeds. No, not versus. That the deeds could follow our intentions and stay on track with exactly what the good intention had to be followed by the good deed. And that can only happen when you're basing things on spiritual principles. You can't get lost. Otherwise, it just starts looking like what the vast majority of people in the world do. People get tempted. People get a little greedy. People choose to be a little violent. And they lose sight of the fact that the goal of this life is self-realization. Swami Kriyananda never lost sight of that. And what we need to do is we need to construct our lives like what Swamiji did at Ananda. We need to consciously, this won't happen if we don't do it consciously, see everything that happens in our life, everything, no exception, as an opportunity to grow closer to God. You want to start a business? You want to start a school? You want to do Hatha Yoga? We just had a Q&A in our Raja Yoga class, and Viveka Devi said something that really reminded me of this. Swamiji started this whole new way of teaching and practicing Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga is thousands, at least, years old. He put an affirmation with every pose. Why did he do that? Because he did not want anybody to think this is just a technique. He spiritualized every movement in Hatha Yoga. This is what he did. This is our example. He never said to us, now do it just like me. He just lived a life where intention and deed lined up to guide us on our path. And we need to bring this into our life. It's not just going to happen. Life is happening. It's happening right now. I've been telling stories, and I'm not going to tell any stories, but it just is a moment in my life where I'm being challenged by some interactions with various people, all good people, all my friends, everybody who's devoted their life to God. And it's happening in several ways, but it's all happening. And I just keep saying to myself, remember this, remember this. It's not like sometimes things happen to you in your life that are the next opportunity to grow closer to God. Everything that happens, never a mistake. A mistake is impossible here. So what do? We step up and we say, what is my intention in life? if my intention is to know and love God, how can I do that through this moment? How can I do it through this moment? How will I do it here and here? There's a wonderful story that I heard about a man in India. This is not a true story, I don't think. Maybe it is a true story. Actually, it's a completely true story because it's based on spiritual principle. And I really don't know. Maybe it's true. But there was a man who was a hunter, and he hunted birds. And he would hunt these birds and then take them to market and sell them. And this is how he made a living. But it was pretty much of a violent act, hunting these birds. But he was sort of happily into his life and wanting to make a lot of money. But every time on the way to market, he passed the river. And on the river, there was a sadhu sitting there. He would see him often, meditating, dressed in a little dhoti, had his beads. He'd be saying mantra, he'd be chanting. And one day, after walking by him many times, the bird hunter noticed something. The birds were not afraid of the sadhu. In fact, they would come right up next to him and sit down next to him. And the hunter thought, this could be good. So he said to himself, I'm going to be like that sadhu. I can do everything he's doing. I can sit there. I can be quiet. I can have beads. I can chant. And he started doing it. And he started doing it every day. And two things happened. The birds did come to him, and he no longer wanted to hunt the birds. Because this is what happens when we change our consciousness. The deeds follow. Our intentions and our deeds come in line. It doesn't happen necessarily naturally. We have to be conscious. We have to act like the holy man in whatever ways it's happening in our life. That's what we need to do. We need to say, how can I change my consciousness so that everything that happens in my life just flows? It would have never dawned on Swami Kriyananda to lie, to steal. I don't know if we were the only people, but when the whole village burned down, big deal. Everything everybody owned and had worked for, gone in hours, in a few hours. And then they found out that that fire had been started by some faulty piece of equipment that the county owned. Well, most of the people in the area sued the county. We would consider that normal, not Swamiji. Swamiji said, this is our karma, this happened. How are we going to grow through it? And very much like every challenging situation that happens in our lives, I'm feeling it again right now with what I'm facing. If we consciously go after right-mindedness, seeing God in everyone, even those people who we're sure are making mistakes, who we're sure are wrong, who may well be wrong. They may be being deceitful in the moment. None of it matters. They're no less divine. What do we care about? We care about finding God. We see the God in them. We don't forget to do that, ever. I was just listening. That song that the choir sang today was so beautiful. It was really beautiful. It was the sermon. It was the service. Often I feel, okay, we can be done now. Yesterday, David and Letty got married, and God bless you for being at service today. They had one night of a honeymoon over in Half Moon Bay in their bag. I mean, really. Anyway, it was a beautiful wedding. Beautiful. Now, neither of their families, I hope it's okay to say this, I fell in love with both of their families. Really great people. Really, to the person. But they're not on this path. They walk in, and this does not look usual to anybody. So it's always a little like, what's going to happen? Anyway, it was a beautiful wedding, really because of who they are. But also, here's what happened. Many of you were here. We had a full choir. It was unbelievable. Karen told me today she doesn't think there's been a choir that big at a wedding since Swamiji's wedding. That's what she said. And the music was exquisite. And afterwards, at least 10 people came up to me and said, I love that. Great ceremony, great everything. I loved that music. Well, of course they did. They felt the vibration that came through Swami Kriyananda with great clarity of the intention of living, knowing our path is always towards self-realization. You play that music, you sing it. Well, what happens? Everybody forgets how strange these pictures look to them. Or what does this woman look like in this robe? Or why is this the first wedding where the bride and groom are facing the altar, not facing the family, not like smiling at their mom and dad? No, it's all about here. But everybody in this temple came together in the vibration of that music. It was so special to feel that happen. That's what happens when intention and deed are aligned. And I'll just say one more thing. That reading that Joycey read today, Joycey first, that's number 209 in Whispers of Eternity. How would I know that? I don't think she said it today. She read it a few weeks ago at a Kriya Satsang group. And it's about one heart. It's perfect, of course, for today. It's about that knowing that we're all one, that we're all deeply connected, that we have to hold that we can't forget to keep looking, because we have to remind ourselves, or this ego is going to get a hold of us and say, nah, come on out here. Look at what's out here. No, keep looking for God in everyone and in every situation. And that's what that reading is. She first read it to me 2 or 3 weeks ago. I started reading it every day. She read it at a little prayer vigil we did last week. She read it today, number 209. Read it. You know, you can't miss when you are attuning yourself to that vibration. If you want your life to change, if you're serious, find a piece of Swamiji's music. Get a copy of Whispers from Eternity. How long did it take her to read it? 2 minutes? At the most, change your consciousness. Act like the holy man. God bless you all.
Keep calling him, keep calling him, keep calling him. Whether he replies or not, keep calling him. In the temple of unceasing prayer, believe that he's approaching and call to him, keep calling him. Thou dost know I'm praying, Lord, you know I love no other. I'll speak not, nor ask when to expect. Om.